Okay, great. So let's get started. Good morning. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session on the joint statement from advocates for science of reading and multilingual learners, a path forward. And there's a question mark after a path forward. So we want to think about and address that question. I'm Claude Goldenberg, and I'm super happy to be joined by Martha Hernandez and Carrie Curto. I'll provide a brief introduction, even briefer than I had anticipated, and then we'll get right to business. Before I do, however, I want to make sure that everyone knows that on the session page, there are links to two EdSource articles. One is about the joint statement that is the topic of our conversation today. And by the way, the joint statement now lives on the Reading League Compass English Literacy. We have so many acronyms. English Learners Emergent Bilinguals page. And Carrie, maybe you can put that in the chat so people can link to it. And there's still an opportunity to sign on should you choose to, and we would encourage everyone to take a look at the statement and consider signing on. And then the other document, the other link, is about a related document that appeared earlier this year, which is a report on the common ground that exists among various stakeholders in discussions about reading policies and practices, specifically here in California. The joint statement that we'll be talking about specifically today really is more national in scope. It has application to California. The common ground was grounded in California, but we think it has application throughout the country as well. So the two EdSource articles are brief and they're informative and provide some context. And each article contains a link to the document that's reporting on the joint statement and then the common ground report. We encourage everyone to take a look at these documents since there's really much more in them than we'll be able to get to today in the discussion and even in what's covered in the EdSource articles. So let me start with a brief introduction and welcome to first Martha Hernandez, who, as many of you know, I'm sure, is the executive director of Californians Together. And she's a founding member of the National Committee for Effective Literacy, which provided the joint part of the joint statement that we'll be talking about. She's been a leading advocate for the educational success of California's more than 1 million English learners. She's been an educator in the public schools for 42 years in various roles: assistant superintendent, director of curriculum, a district administrator, principal, staff developer, teacher, and special education teacher. And she's played a number of very important roles in her distinguished career, including being president of the California Association for Bilingual Education. And Carrie Curto is the National Science of Reading Project Director at the Reading League. She directs all work related to Reading League Compass, which, Carrie, did you put that in the chat?
Sure did, Claude.
And she supports work related to English learners, emergent bilinguals, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. She's the curriculum evaluation guideline honcho and runs communities of practice for state education agencies and faculty from educator preparation programs who seek to align their programs to evidence-based practices. Carrie's an Orton Gillingham trained practitioner and worked in schools in Rhode Island and Texas with students who had reading difficulties and disabilities, including dyslexia. So Martha and Carrie, welcome and thank you very much for joining us. I would also like to introduce Janice Jones, who is the Director of Multilingual Programs and State Federal Accountability in HEMT, and she's also an advisory board member of the Reading League California chapter. Janice is going to be monitoring the chat, and we're going to try very hard to leave 10 minutes at the end to get to as many of those questions as possible. Okay, so without further ado, let's jump right into the meat of the matter. So I just want to make sure, first of all, that everyone's clear on the lay of the land. Carrie's organization, the Reading League, has as its mission, as many of you I'm sure know, to advance awareness and understanding and the use of evidence-aligned reading instruction. the organization that Martha is representing, the National Committee on Effective Literacy, is committed to uplifting research, policies, practices to ensure that English learners, emergent bilinguals, multilingual learners, as you know, we use various terms to refer to these students, that they leave school as proficient readers and writers in English and in at least their home language, So the goal is at least bilingualism, and not just for English learners, for students in general. So as the session title suggests, it's fair to say that the Reading League has been associated with advocacy for what's been called the science of reading, and that NCEL has been associated with advocacy for multilingual learners, in particular bilingual approaches for these and for all students. So let me start with a top-line question. Your two organizations have just released a pretty remarkable joint statement with a long list of agreements. I don't know if it would have been predictable as recently as 2 years ago. And your organizations have been associated with advocacy for these positions. So my question is, should people take this joint statement to mean that one can be, or maybe ought to be, an advocate for the science of reading and for multilingual learners? Martha, would you like to get us started?
Oh, sure. Well, I think and hope that this is the case for most. I'm highlighting that the body of the science of reading is a comprehensive one that includes research on literacy for English learners, emergent bilingual students, and informs the field about best practices for this particular group of students. And that, what is implemented, I think we need to kind of compare that to what is actually supported by evidence. But I think we're talking about a both and model of literacy. And so that's my brief answer for that.
Carrie?
Yep, I couldn't agree more. And which is why we work so well together, Martha. We do understand that there is research to support, to help us understand how to support English learners and be in emergent bilinguals. That is part of the body of knowledge of the science of reading. And we also agree that this research can and should be uplifted more to inform our instructional materials, our PD, and that substantiates classroom practices that should be enacted. And I'm going to put into the chat one of my favorite parts of the joint statement, and I'll let everybody just read through. But it basically says that it's our collective objective to unite, that the science of reading is that body of knowledge that we can and should use to inform instruction, and also address the social, linguistic, and cultural factors that impact students.
Okay, great. So I think that's a great sort of platform to start off on. So now I'd like to know, and I'm sure our audience would like to know, how the joint statement came about, right? I mean, what led up to it? As I said, I don't think it was predictable a short 1.5 2 years ago. So give us the backstory and, call out perhaps some key or seminal moments you think people should know about. Carrie, you want to get started this time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe that our discussions began when the NCEL white paper was published and the accompanying YouTube video explaining it. This was actually my first month at the Reading League. I had come from the Rhode Island Department of Education previously, and there was a meeting of the minds. Claude, you were there. We had some representatives from NCTQ, many other literacy experts, and we jumped on a call and we said, well, what should we have a response? What should that be? And I know that Claude, you and Linda Diamond had written a response. It's on the Reading League Compass. But through the discussion, we kind of developed a feeling that maybe we needed to hear out some of these things that were of concern for NCEL. And maybe let's not go back and forth without actually listening and learning to with one another. And so it began by a virtual meeting that the Reading League convened. Tracy Whedon kicked us off, and we first started by sharing what our why was, and that was really powerful, and I highly recommend that as a starting point. So we listened to why this work was important to us and really started to understand that we are all in this for the same reason. From that initial virtual meeting, we then had a series of meetings over the course of the summer where direct questions were asked, written responses were given, and then when we met, we were able to discuss those written responses. And through these meetings, I think it helped us really develop trust, develop understanding, and that led to the Reading League Summit in February of last year, where we all convened in a room for the first time together. It was a little nerve-wracking because honestly, we didn't know what exactly was going to transpire, but we had 4 panels and we all seemed to look at one another, and we were kind of all clapping at the same moments and nodding our heads in agreement. And I think that really was surprising and it was powerful. So we have those recordings that are now published on the Reading League Compass ELEB page. And we didn't want that to be the end all be all, right? At the summit, we knew that we had continued work to do. Plus, I just would have missed hanging out with Martha and all of you wonderful folks. So we had some exciting yet nerve-wracking meetings after the summit, where we crafted the joint statement. We tried to integrate the perspective and voices of lots of folks, revised it over the course of the summer, and then it was finalized in August, and we began to collect signatures. And as Claude, you mentioned, it's now on the Reading League Compass, and we're very open to gathering additional signatures and logos of nonprofit or professional organizations.
So Carrie, just to be clear, you and Martha co-planned that summit. I mean, that was really a kind of a joint planning effort. Just to be clear, everyone understands that. Yeah.
Yes,
Martha, what's your take on, obviously, what's your take, Martha?
Obviously, I echo everything that Carrie said. You know, it was the Reading League that brought together this diverse group of experts and researchers and advocates for this series of collaborative meetings. And I just want to highlight that in the process, we recognize the need for mutual respect and understanding. The conversations were aimed to address points of contention and build trust. And, it was, a little tense, to, be truthful, but through the process, Carrie invited us to participate in the Reading League. And so, it was just kind of a continual engagement with each other with a particular, focus on wanting to do what was best for students and for their literacy achievement. I do want to say, during the initial first convening, and I think it was March of 2022, it was acknowledged, that sometimes the proponents of the science of reading sometimes overlook the essential language needs of English learners and emergent bilingual students. And so that was really kind of really good for us to hear. And we also clarified what the science of reading is and is not, building an understanding, of course, that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not a rigid instructional program or solely focused on phonics. So there was a lot of clarification in the process.
You mentioned research, and both of your organizations obviously support research. The practice must be based on research informed, but in different ways, historically and philosophically, maybe even sometimes opposing views have surfaced that you both mentioned. Were you surprised that you were able to produce a statement with so much agreement? Martha?
Well, yeah, thinking about where we started, yes, I'm amazed that we were able to produce this joint statement with all of the alignments and agreements, but it was a process, as we mentioned. And I think, again, it was about relationship and trust building. Carrie and I were charged with organizing our initial Reading League and NCEL Zoom meetings. And so we had to engage with each other and talk to each other. And as I said, yes, there was tension, no doubt about it. But I found that if an NSAL member had feedback about our meeting norms or the meeting questions or the order of the agenda or the agenda items, that Carrie and Maria listened to the concern, talked to the Reading League members or partners, and together they tried to adjust and incorporate and provide a rationale. And so our feedback was truly considered. And so as Carrie and I were liaisons for our respective organizations and committees, we just began to develop a trusting relationship. So I grew to know that she cares about all students, including multilingual learners. And then she was so gracious to invite us to participate in the Reading Summit. And as you mentioned, Claude, it wasn't just as a participant, but she asked for suggestions for panelists. And she provided me with the opportunity to provide opening remarks alongside her and share the stage with her. So, I do have to admit that, going to Las Vegas for the Reading League Summit in 2023, I was terrified, really, to be in a room with 500 people with a different lens and different beliefs. But we found that many in the room shared the same concerns about English learners. And they applauded, for example, when I stated that English learners should not be an afterthought or an addendum when developing literacy initiatives. So I think that was a turning point. And also, Claude, I'm not sure that we use research differently, but true that NSAL is focused on uplifting research that is focused on English learners.
Okay, great. I know people are eager to get into some of the substance here, so let's switch to that. What do you think? Oh, I'm sorry, Carrie, did you want to say? Oh, no, you already did. Sorry, my bad. So what do you think Go
I
ahead.
think Carrie has
The
additional
Reading
comment.
League never could have engaged in this work without Martha and Shelley Spiegel-Coleman and Patricia and Magali and lots of NCEL folks that you brought half of the audience with you that we never would have been able to reach because there is an underlying distrust, perhaps because of the communication that's existed. So I am very proud of the work that we did together. And I also am surprised that within the last week, I've seen Martha talk about the joint statement in the Lexia presentation. I got an email from Lori Olson that she discussed it in a speech that she recently had in California. And so it is exciting. And yes, it is surprising that we are where we are now.
Great. So let's talk a little bit of the substance. What do you think the joint statement's main points are that you want people to get from our discussion today? Hoping that they'll actually go and read it. But what are the high points that you think people should walk away with? Carrie, you want to start?
Sure. I think that number one, what Martha said, what the science of reading is, what it is not, it's not a program, it's not an approach, it's that body of knowledge. And really understanding the title. We know that there's the science of reading that we learn from, and that it is inclusive of many populations of students, including English learners and emergent bilinguals. We know that from this research, we can uplift practices that work to better understand practices that can lead to skilled reading and writing. And I think that we need to understand the difference between the science of reading and some of those practices that are being implemented under the name of the science of reading that are not actually aligned to the scientific evidence base. So I'd also really like to uplift the final paragraph of the joint statement if you haven't had a chance to read it. And again, I'll put it in the chat, but just truly that it's our goal to stand unified as a community of experts, assert that our vision for what practices will lead to or deter equitable outcomes and high achievement for all students, particularly ELEB students, and that working together with a collective assets-based understanding focused on alignment and our common goal of advancing literacy outcomes for all students is the right thing to do for our field and for our students. So I'll put that in the chat.
Thanks. Martha, your thoughts?
So in terms of, the joint statement's main points, I think for me, I guess the agreement is that the evidence-based reading instruction for multilingual learners is, comprehensive. All students have to receive a comprehensive instruction that includes all the elements of literacy, including language development and, the development of content knowledge, vocabulary, as well as, of course, foundational skills, comprehension and writing. And we can't forget the importance of English language development. ELD is a partner to literacy. I think there's so many things. And so in terms of kind of uplifting the importance of home language as a, oral language and home language as an asset, I guess, to leverage second language literacy. And the fact that the statement also includes the, embracing of cross-language connections as a key strategy, inviting students to, share words for things in their home language that they're learning in the classroom, and just beginning to kind of activate the cross-language metalinguistic awareness. That is one of the greatest strengths of bilingualism. There's other things. I think one of the important things is that it affirms the importance of the integration of language, literacy, writing, and content knowledge. And so I think those are the important. And of course, we believe that, of course, access to dual language instruction whenever possible is optimal, so that students learn in their home language and in English to work towards the goal of positive literacy, I guess, outcomes in both languages. But I think those are the important pieces.
So what about, are there still areas of disagreement? Like typically one of the areas that gets a lot of heat is the issue of foundational skills, systematic, explicit foundational skills instruction. Are these still areas of disagreement, or are there areas that didn't get included? Are there some you want to highlight that are still important and need more discussion, like systematic and explicit foundational skills instruction, for example?
Well, in the joint statement, of course, there is the statement that systematic, explicit instruction and foundational skills is critical. It's critical for all students, including English learners or multilingual learners. And I don't think that was ever kind of an issue. In terms of areas of disagreement or things that didn't get included, I do want to state that the joint statement is a result of the conversations and topics raised at the Reading League Summit in Las Vegas in March 2023. It is not all encompassing. It does not include some of the topics and issues that both the Reading League and NSAL agree are also highly relevant to the development of successful readers in both multilingual and non-multilingual settings. But for LSAL, we are interested in continuing the conversation as it relates to literacy socialization, print access and opportunity to support parents, caregivers, and early childhood educators. There's the whole notion of the social cultural aspects of literacy development, by literacy pedagogy, we really haven't really kind of, really looked at that, as well as, issues of language status and impacts on literacy development. And I guess maybe we still have issues to discuss related to, sequence, duration, dosage, some really kind of specific things. But again, we were focused on the conversations and topics that surfaced during the Reading League Summit 2023.
Carrie?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Martha says, that there were some questions that arose about, we really want to address adolescent literacy, and we were about to kind of dive into that, and then we said, you know what, I think that if we actually want to get this done, we need to stick to the content and the conversations that we had at the Reading League Summit. So surely after the statement was finalized and put out, we've gotten feedback from folks that have questions about certain aspects that you would not be surprised about, the role of context, which I have not yet, seen scientifically based research that requires that as an element, you know, questions about cueing from folks. But again, that was not something that was directly discussed at the Reading League Summit, and so it was not included.
Okay, fair enough. Good. So that's great. We've got maybe another 3 or 4 minutes. Let's look ahead a little bit now, because we want this, as both of you have said, we want this to continue. This is not the end by any means. Can you say just a few things about what you think are the, you know, important implications? I mean, one of the part of the title of the session is the path forward ? So what is the path forward from here? You know, a lot of people are involved in reading education, government entities at all levels, publishers, teachers, administrators. What would you say to them, and address anyone you want to, about the path forward? What needs to happen now? How can we build on this quite important progress that we've observed? What would you say about the path forward? What are some actionable steps to any audience that you wish to address? Carrie, do you want to go first?
Sure. So my familiarity with California comes largely from my friends like Claude and Martha, but overall, you know, I think policymakers, I would call upon them to listen to folks that have true expertise in literacy, not just, you know, a couple of friends and whatnot. We also have a policymakers page of the Reading League Compass that might be helpful. It can't just address foundational skills. It cannot just address phonics. It needs to be comprehensive. I also hope that this collaborative model that Martha and I have shared with you today is one that we can all aspire to use. If we can start with a place of alignment, right? Let's not go forth and speak ill of that which you do not first seek to understand. And be wary of following just a few influencers who offer blanket statements of distrust. If we can all just form a base of understanding of where we align. And I just saw Marianne Wolf put a comment in the chat about an expanded view of foundational skills, right? We need to start with all of those aspects of literacy that we agree on. Emergent bilinguals require robust English language development. That is essential. Those instructional minutes can't be compromised or borrowed. We agree that all students benefit from understanding the structure of language. So that is morphology, semantics, syntax. We all agree that writing is essential, including handwriting, spelling, sentence, syntax, sentence generation, combination, right? Let's start with those areas where we absolutely align and we know that they are essential. Content knowledge, I remember Martha saying that earlier, that this can be done through oral language at first, and then we have to explicitly and systematically teach the code so that we can continue to learn that through texts. So if we could start with alignment, then we can help prevent overwhelming administrators, overwhelming educators, preventing initiative overload, and truly work together to push publishers, to push policymakers. At the Reading League, we often say it takes a league, and everyone on this call, you are part of our league. We hope to listen to you, and so that we can all move forward together to support all students. It's going to take all of us.
Martha?
I just want to say that, in the joint statement, there are clear recommendations, right, that can inform policymakers, publishers, and districts and teachers. So I say, use the joint statement to identify best practices, as well as those, as Carrie said, that are implemented in schools under the name of the science of reading that aren't aligned with the science about how English learner, emergent bilingual students learn to read. But I just want to kind of highlight, some of the practices that we need to kind of ward against, right? Abandoning ELD, oral language development, primary language support instruction, knowledge in the content areas for the sake of a literacy block that's really focused just solely on foundational word reading skills. And also that, our professional development needs to kind of intentionally include English learners and emergent bilingual students, and that they should not be treated in a superficial way in an addendum or, in a kind of a box at the side. And so, and that, that instruction should be informed by a variety of assessments in all languages of instruction whenever possible, including teacher observations of student progress. We're all about data, but, English learners may have a larger linguistic repertoire in more than one language that should be considered when looking at the totality of a student's literacy skills, especially when we're considering intervention or placement in Tier 2. And just that dedicated time for ELD is necessary and should not be removed to make time for the second or third dose of intervention. And you don't have to, make sure you have all the foundational skills in place before you introduce the other aspects of literacy. And so I'm just thinking that, if policymakers and the like could use the joint statement as a tool, I think that we're taking one step forward in terms of literacy achievement for all students in California.
Great, wonderful. Some good news. I just got a direct message from our producer that we have an additional 10 minutes. Yay. So I was going to end this segment by asking you for a sort of a one-sentence takeaway from each of you, but I think we can expand that to maybe 2 or 3 sentences takeaway, maybe a paragraph. And then at about 11, let's see, it's 11:38, I have 11:40, we'll have, we'll still have 10 minutes for questions. So 2 or 3 sentence takeaway from each of you. Who would like to go first?
Me? A takeaway, it's just that just look at what we were able to accomplish through, engagement, through, listening to each other, through mutual respect, and through trust. And so, we came together, we sought to meld together a shared voice and guidance to the field about what a science of reading might be that embraces multilingual learners. And, we found some very significant common ground. And so I just want to thank Carrie Curto. I am the biggest sap in the world. I just want to thank her for, working with us. I have to let everyone know that every word in that joint statement was discussed, it was considered, it might have been debated. And so it wasn't easy, but I think that moving forward, we just need to, work together for the benefit of all of our students.
Thank you. Carrie?
You're going to make
you
me
a SAP?
talk about that?
Are you a
I know.
SAP too?
Yes. Thank you, Martha. I have a lot of love for you. Thank you. There was no blood, but there was a lot of sweat and tears, mostly happy tears. So thank you. My takeaway, I think, is build knowledge in what the science of reading is. Read the research. We have a lot of it listed on the ELEB page of the Reading League Compass. The work of Linnea Airy is there. We have the National Literacy Panel report. The Reading League bought the rights to the executive summary, so it's available at no cost to you as a download. And build your knowledge. Build your knowledge. Don't ostracize folks in your schools. Try to work together. It's likely that you are having the same ideas, but maybe using different language. So connect with others who agree and who disagree, and do so in a respectful manner, but you also have to be humble. I think that was an ingredient we haven't really talked about in this equation, but you have to have humility. admit some of the things where you might not have been strong in what you've said, right? I think you need that in order to truly listen and learn. And if we can do that, and if we can find our alignments, we can move the field forward together. We can avoid that confusion. We can avoid that lost time because our students need us now.
Great. Well, thank you both. So now I'm going to turn it over to Janice, who has very helpfully offered to curate the questions. Good luck with that, Janice. I'm glad we offloaded it to you. So Tia,
Yes, there's some great questions and many, many comments that are very validating of the work. One of the questions that received a lot of interest was this one: a concern that what is being packaged as the science of reading is not really the science, and what it says is not new. The general public doesn't know this, and it may lead to poor implementation practices and hurt more comprehensive, cultural responsive, and critical literacy-based programs and practices. How can we make sure the messaging being shared here makes it to the schools and general public?
I say that's up to all of y'all on this call. How many do we have right now in this room? But I would love to hear from the group as to how we think we can continue to share this message. It's up there. We continue to talk about it. There are a lot of misconceptions. It's also the reason why the Reading League created the defining guide and the curriculum evaluation guidelines. So resources like that are out there to help understand what actually is derived specifically from the evidence. So yeah, again, I would love to hear from everyone.
Also, I think policymakers play a role here, in messaging this, comprehensive approach to literacy, and that I think we just need to make sure that our policymakers are informed, that they know the research, and that they read the joint statement. And also, I think that everybody, district leaders, principals, they're trying to do the right thing, especially I think post-pandemic. But may, as Carrie said, are interpreting the science or interpreting the professional learning that they're receiving, and really kind of implementing it in a way that's not supported by the science. And so, we need materials, we need publishers to publish materials that does address the comprehensive nature of literacy. And for English learners, we need a lot of professional learning on English language development. It's a missing piece. It's something that teachers grapple with. It's really hard to do. They need support. And we need to provide the capacity building for teachers to meet the needs of all of their students. It's not an easy thing to do. It's pretty difficult. So, again, I want to go back to also in California, we have the ELA ELD framework. It does have all of the components. It does include foundational skills. It could use, some, updating, but I think that we need to really build on the policies that California has built. Now, Carrie is from the other side of the country and has a more national perspective, and I'm speaking very much to California. But sometimes California does lead the way. Sometimes California doesn't. But I think we need to really put resources into a focus on a comprehensive approach that includes foundational skills, but does not leave the other elements out.
great, thanks.
Thank
Janice, next.
Yes, we have another question. As we move toward universal screening for reading risk in California, what are some important considerations for finding adequate screening tools in additional languages?
Yes, and so I think that as we speak, there is going to be a panel of experts that will be formed through the state board and the California Department of Ed. And of course, we want to make sure that we have all of the experts around the table. Of course, we are looking at assessments that are culturally and linguistically appropriate for students. That is going to be hard because there are many, many languages spoken in California, but, starting with maybe the top 5 languages. And so just making sure that they're culturally, linguistically appropriate. And of course, we want to make sure that there are safeguards, that we don't, over-identify, English learners as at risk of reading difficulties if it is a language issue. So hopefully California will be able to have kind of a list. They're going to be developing a list that districts can use, and hopefully there will be training that's associated with this type of assessment in California.
And I'll also share that our next summit will be in San Diego in April, April 27th, I believe. And we will have a panel discussing assessment. It'll be moderated by Dr. Lillian Duran. And I'm sure we'll have some answers to similar questions at the summit.
And there
Great.
was one more
Yeah, go ahead.
question.
Yep.
Martha, you did lift the importance of dual language settings for our multilingual learners. Can you speak to, or can the panel speak to the implications of this joint statement for multilingual learners in dual language settings? For example, students in early grades who are in a 90-10 model.
And so, as I mentioned that, the Reading Summit didn't really address bilingual pedagogy, but we did point out some things in the joint statement. For example, the fact that, this, cross-linguistic, issue of, if you learn sounds, for example, in one language, you shouldn't have to relearn them in English. You already know them. So you do have to have a strategic kind of scope of sequence, and only teach those sounds that the students haven't learned or do not exist in their target language in a dual language immersion program. And also that we need to teach phonics in a way that's authentic to the language, because in some languages, the sequence and the process of teaching foundational skills differs slightly from English. And so we may need to make sure that that is done in a way that's authentic. It's not kind of a translated version of pedagogy that you do what you do in English for English phonics in another language. But that's maybe another joint statement that we create in the future, or it's something that the National Committee for Effective Literacy can consider in terms of doing a brief on biliteracy. In fact, I think we do have people already in the field working on something like that, and hopefully we can get that out ASAP.
Yeah, and not to mention also the role of building content knowledge, vocabulary in the language that a student is lived in, that can then transfer, that's also essential. And yes, the emerging research on contrastive analysis is very interesting. We're keeping a close eye on that.
Carrie, it's going to close in 6 minutes. So
Oh.
I just want to thank both of you, and you and Martha, and for Janice and for audience. Thank you very, very much. This has been a great session. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you all for your comments in the chat.
Thank you.